All right, today we're going to dig into a policy paper that's proposing a pretty radical rethink of Australia's whole energy future. It's called the Hybrid Energy Strategy, and the big idea is to use, well, everything: coal, gas, nuclear, and renewables to completely reshape the country's grid. So let's get right into it. So here's how we're going to break this down. We'll look at it in 5 key parts. First up, why does the paper argue that we need a major change, like right now? Then we'll get into the huge impact of artificial intelligence, which is a real curveball. After that, we'll unpack their proposed 5-pillar solution. Then, of course, we'll look at the money, the economic case they're making. And to wrap it all up, we'll see how the paper tries to answer the biggest objections to its plan.
Okay, so first things first, what's the problem this paper is trying to solve? Well, it paints a picture of Australia at this really critical moment, this inflection point. It says the country's dealing with soaring prices, an unstable grid, and what it describes as an energy policy that's, a bit stuck in its ways.
And to kick things off, the paper takes a snapshot of where the power is coming from right now. And, well, you can see here, as of 2024, fossil fuels are still doing the heavy lifting. We're talking coal, gas, and oil, making up a combined 64% of Australia's electricity. Renewables are covering the other 36%. Now, here's a figure the paper really zeroes in on. Despite this big push for renewables, it points out that household electricity prices jumped a massive 72% in real terms in just 10 years. And it says that trend is still going, which, yeah, that's a huge hit to the cost of living. And this all leads to a pretty sharp critique of current policy. You see this quote here? The paper basically argues that the government's goal of 82% renewable electricity by 2030, well, is just not connected to reality. They call it an aspiration that ignores the engineering, supply chain, and even community challenges involved. Okay, now let's move on to the second part of the argument, because this is where things get really interesting. The paper throws a new player into the mix, something it calls an absolute game changer: the incredible, ravenous power demands of AI. Now, to really get what they're saying about AI, we need to quickly define a G term: dispatchable power. It's a simple idea, really. It just means power you can turn on whenever you need it, 24/7, rain or shine. Think of things like coal, gas, or nuclear. This is the opposite of, say, solar or wind, which, only work when the sun's out or the wind's blowing. So the paper's big claim is that AI doesn't just need a lot of power. It needs a ton of this reliable, dispatchable 24/7 power. And to back this up, it points to this staggering projection: a 117% jump in global demand for uranium by 2040. And it argues a huge chunk of that increase is coming directly from the need to power all these new AI data centers. And this is where the paper really flips the script. It says, hey, don't just look at AI as this massive power drain. Instead, as this quote shows, it frames the global AI build-out as the single biggest opportunity in energy for a generation, a huge new market just waiting for a country that can supply that reliable power. All right, so the paper's laid out the problem. It's pointed to this massive new AI opportunity. So what's the solution? This brings us to the core of its proposal, what it calls the 5-pillar hybrid strategy. And here are those 5 pillars. The reason they call it hybrid is pretty straightforward. It's all about using every tool in the toolbox. We're talking modernizing coal and gas, bringing nuclear into the picture, keeping the renewables that actually make commercial sense, going hard after that global AI market, and crucially, making sure households are protected along the way. Okay, let's zoom in on those first 2 pillars, because they're all about building what the paper calls a dispatchable core. The plan is basically this: keep the viable coal plants online until a replacement is ready, build some new, high-efficiency gas plants for backup, and this is the big one, get rid of the federal ban on nuclear power so we can start deploying these new small modular reactors, or SMRs, right on the sites of old decommissioned coal plants. The other 3 pillars, then, are all about the market, industry, and the people. The proposal is to get rid of mandates and subsidies for renewables, making it a level playing field. Then, they want to create these special AI energy zones to tempt the big global tech companies to set up shop here. And on the consumer side, they suggest a price cap on wholesale electricity, plus funding to help workers in coal regions retrain and transition. So that's the plan. But the big question is, how does the paper argue that this whole thing actually makes sense, financially? Let's get into the economic case they make for this hybrid approach. The entire economic argument really hinges on understanding one key difference. It's the difference between generator cost and system cost. Think of it this way. Generator cost is just the price to make the power, right at the source, like at a solar farm.
But the system cost is the real cost. It includes all the extra stuff you need, like batteries for storage, backup power for when the sun isn't shining, and all the poles and wires to actually get that power to your house. In this table is where that distinction really comes to life. When you look at the total system costs, the paper's analysis shows these new small modular reactors, or SMRs, suddenly look very, very competitive. At an estimated $64 to $77 per megawatt hour, the paper claims they're actually a lot cheaper than wind and solar once you add in all the costs of making those renewables reliable around the clock. Now, it's super important to note that the paper doesn't sell this as some kind of quick fix. Not at all. It lays out a 16-year plan broken into 4 phases. The first steps are all about changing laws and building new gas plants. But the first of those nuclear SMRs, they wouldn't even come online until the mid-2030s, with a full fleet of them not up and running until the early 2040s. So it's a long game.
All right, last but not least, the paper knows there's going to be pushback, right? So it has a whole section just for tackling the big objections. Let's dive into how it answers a couple of the most common ones.
First up, the big one. The classic argument against nuclear. Isn't it way too expensive, and doesn't it take forever to build?
The paper's answer is all about new tech. It argues these small modular reactors, these SMRs, are a totally different beast from the giant nuclear plants of the past. The idea is you can mass-produce the parts in a factory and then assemble them on site, which should drive down costs and speed things up. Plus, they say Australia could just adopt proven designs from allied nations to get a head start.
Okay, next objection. And this is a big one we've heard for years. But come on, aren't renewables just flat out cheaper?
And the paper's response brings us right back to that key idea of system costs. It says, yes, renewables are cheaper, but only at the generator. Their argument is that once you factor in all the extra costs, the batteries, the backup gas plants, the thousands of kilometers of new transmission lines needed to make them work 24/7, that's when they claim that cost advantage disappears.
And to wrap it all up, the paper leaves us with this final thought. It tries to reframe the entire conversation. It says this isn't a choice between prosperity and responsibility. Instead, it frames it as a choice between pragmatism, using every tool you've got, and ideology. It's a really provocative way to end a pretty detailed and, let's be honest, challenging proposal for how Australia should power its future.